Hey there everybody, it is that time again. Brand new Magic the Gathering cards have been released for our eyeballs to enjoy. I'm talking of course about the Dragon's Maze full spoiler. We've seen every card there is to see. I've taken a little bit of time to look at them, and I've decided that it'd be awesome if, like the previous set with Gatecrash, we just sat down and took a look at each of these cards and what they mean for the limited format we're going to be entering into this weekend. So we're going to take a look at each of these cards, talk a little bit about how they'll function in pre-release, or how I expect that they'll function in pre-release, and hopefully we'll get a little bit of a dialogue going in the comments as well, because I do not know everything by any means. There's a lot of stuff that I'm going to be missing. And I would really enjoy to hear some feedback in the comments, and just everybody just kind of talk about these cards, and we can figure out how we are going to take first place in our respective pre-release events. Moving on to our very first card, we're going to be starting with black with Bane Alley Blackguard. This guy is a 1/3 for 2 mana. Now, in my 40 card limited decks, I generally like to prescribe to the golden ratio, which is going to be 16, 8, 16. 16 creatures, 8 spells of various type, enchantment, instance. Usually I like to dedicate those 8 to being removal spells or battle tricks, combat tricks. But I also like to have 16 land, and that's kind of the ratio that I find works really well. It's one that's been written about several times over. You can deviate from it a little bit as you become more experienced, but it's a great starting point. And this guy really helps us hit that 16 creature minimum that we want to get to. Sometimes we find ourselves almost wanting to splash another color, a 4th color, or something like that to get enough creatures because we didn't really pull what we needed. Little creatures like this that are 2-drops are pretty easy to just drop on the field and not worry about. The problem that I see with this guy is the aggression in the format. We've got Selesnya dropping huge threats every turn. We've got Selesnya dropping creatures like instant speed, 5/5s with trample that just flash in. We've got a lot of problems on the other side of the field, not to mention we have Rakdos as well that's going to be coming in and just drilling our faces. We've also got Gruul Blood Rush. There's a lot of things that just make this guy inconsequential really quickly, and that's my problem with him. He's a 1/3 with no special abilities, with nothing special going on with him. That is going to get out-muscled, especially if our opponent is on the play. If we are on the defensive, if we're drawing our cards and getting ready to set up shop, I don't think this guy's actually going to stall our opponents at all. He's just not very much of a threat. If he was like, I'd almost rather have something with like a 1/1 Death Toucher or something, because it's going to be a little bit more of a deterrent to our opponent than a 1/3. I just don't think that he's going to be getting rid of enough dudes as he is. Moving on to Blood Scrivener, is that even a word? If you would draw a card while you have no cards in hand, instead draw 2 cards and lose 1 life. This guy's pretty good, especially in Limited. In Limited, card draw, card advantage is super important. And you can easily play down, especially in the black colors and the black pairings. It's possible to just play out your hand maybe a little too quickly and then be constantly afraid of what your opponent has. That being said, this guy is relatively easy to get rid of. A 2/1 is a little bit weak out on the field, but the fact that he is a 2-drop means that you can have other mana open for other things. Of course, the fact that he's a 2-drop means a lot of people are going to be tempted to drop him early when he really doesn't do anything. You want to drop this guy late. He wants to be the last thing out of your hand, so that you can actually use his ability and get those extra cards. Remember that life is just a resource. You don't really want to worry about your life points or your total until you're right around 14. Usually I don't really worry about my life until I'm around 14. But still, at that point you can make the executive decision that sometimes it is in your best interest to lose a little bit of life. That being said, they can do all sorts of tricks where they make this guy stay out there, and then you feel like you can't play cards because you're going to take the 1 damage. So he is a double-edged sword. This card's definitely not for everybody, but I did just want to point out that the card draw is pretty big in limited format. Krypt Incursion. Exile all creature cards from target player's graveyard, and you gain 3 life for each card exiled this way. This card's very interesting because it's specific hate against certain decks. It's very obviously for mirror matches. It's for if you're splashing against. It's also really interesting because it's black, so it's into mirror colors as well. So you've got this kind of. Orzhov doesn't really get to utilize this as well, But you've got the Dimir effect, which is going to be milling out your opponent's, not their specific effect that was built into this block. But you've just got kind of the gimmick of the Dimir guild is to mill your opponent out, and then you can gain a bunch of life at instant speed. Now, instant speed life gain is fantastic, especially when it has the potential to be a massive amount of life gain. You're just going to be able to target your opponent and just blast through them, not really have to worry about them swinging in on you, because this will completely destroy their combat math. If they think they have you at lethal with swinging with every single creature, you'll be able to use this, gain a little bit of life, and then your creatures can come back and kill them in a perfect world. So this is actually a pretty good card. That being said, it's definitely not a card that I want to main board. I want to keep this in my pre-release box, in my bag, and then if the need arises, I want to pull it out and be like, this is great in this matchup. I'm going to slip that into my 40, take something else out, of course, and then we're going to go be back into the races, back into that matchup. So it is definitely a fantastic sideboard card. It's something you want to hold on to. It's definitely not something you want to discount at all, but it is also not something that I see being super useful, since I think the real crux, the real thing we're going to have to look out for is Selesnya, which has tokens that won't hit the graveyard, and Rakdos. I think those are going to be two very popular guilds, as they have been before. So there's not going to be a whole lot of creatures in the yard for us to utilize this against. So it really is just a matchup-specific card. Moving on to Fatal Fumes. Target creature gets -4, -2 until the end of the turn. This is kind of trying to be a removal, but it's just not tricky enough for me. It also costs 4, so it's not my favorite card by any means. It is not great. And in your allied colors, you're going to have other ways to deal with creatures that are a little bit more effective and a little bit cheaper than this card. If you absolutely have to use it, if you don't have enough removal, you think, you don't have your 8 spells that you want in your deck, this is something that can be in there as a little bit of a trick, a little bit of a combat trick there. And as I said, I do like combat tricks. I just don't think that this is silly enough for my tastes. Hired Torture's a defender, but for 3, a black, and a tap, he's going to target an opponent. That guy's going to lose 2 life, and then reveal a card at random from his or her hand. Now, this is a pretty interesting ability, especially considering how early this guy comes out. We can't use it that turn. He's obviously a little bit weak with 3 in the ass. He's pretty easy for the opponent to kill. But they're going to lose 2 life, which is really nice. If they're in step, you can just be like, hey, lose 2 life. Not to mention the fact that for higher tier players, and for those seeking to be higher tier players, he's going to give them the added benefit of seeing a card in your opponent's hand, and you'll be able to write that card, write that down, and then keep kind of a tally of what your opponent has. Of course, your opponent can be a little bit tricky if they have multiple cards of the same type or the same name in their hand. It's going to be a little bit harder for you to keep up, and I would like to say that that can lead to some misplays, because you'll be like, well, he or she played that card and not realize that they could possibly have another one. But that is a completely different subject. Just be a little bit worried about that. In my opinion, I like this guy. He comes down. He might not do a whole lot, but he's going to do a little bit of work. Also, on the flip side, I don't love that he has Defender. I don't see him going off more than twice, really. But the extra kind of tiering, depending on, like, some newer players will be like, 2 damage, that's fantastic. But the higher skill players are going to have their pad and paper ready with this guy. I think he could be kind of a sleeper hit. I'm not sure about him. I think he might be a little bit slow considering the aggression I expect from the other side of the table, but he could be a little bit of a sleeper hit. You could throw some things on him. May's Abomination. This guy touches with death. Multicolored creatures you control have death touch as well. This guy is a 6-drop. There's actually a suite of these cards, one in every color, that give various abilities. This one gives Death Touch, which is one of my favorite abilities of all time. Not to mention the fact that this guy pairs very easily with green, obviously, a color that gives Trample like it's candy. So, in a perfect world, I foresee me having a couple, maybe 2, creatures that have both Death Touch and Trample. That interaction, of course, is amazing because lethal damage for a creature with Death Touch is only 1. So you get to swing in, deal 1 damage to a creature no matter how fat its ass is, and then the remainder of the damage is going to hit your opponent's nug face, which is always great. Some people don't know that that's a thing. You might have to call a judge on them, but it is real. It's actual. And to me, it's pretty satisfactual. Pontiff of Blight, this guy's got Extort, and other creatures you control have Extort. Now, that price tag is a little steep. I know he is another 6-drop in this deck if we're building mono black, which I kind of hope we're not. But Pontiff of Blight, pretty interesting card. He's going to give all my other creatures Extort, which you might be saying this is pretty late in the game. How good is that? Well, I think we all saw how powerful Extort is and was in the previous pre-release. So I think we all know that late game is the perfect time to have a lot of Extort triggers available to you. Because then you will have a huge mana sink. Every card you draw can almost be a kill spell. This guy's actually very good. I think he's a good late game bomb if you have another play. You have to have a ton of mana saved up to really make sure this guy's good. Because as always, I like creatures with enter the battlefield effects more than a creature like this because you kind of have to wait one turn. Hopefully they don't have removal. But the fact that he's a 7 in the ass is a huge deal because he's probably going to live to your next turn. And there isn't a huge amount of removal out there. So this guy's excellent. I think he's a huge mana sink late game, going to allow you to finish your opponents off with relative ease. Rakdos Drake is a flying unleash creature. You may have this creature enter the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. It can block as long as it can't block as long as it has a +1/+1 counter. Personally, if you are playing Rakdos, I think that you want to be a little bit quicker than Rakdos Drake allows you to be. This guy is a flyer, and evasion is huge in limited formats because there's not a lot of removal, like I said. But even your colors that are classically weak against flyers are a little bit stronger with so many multicolored spells and so much branching and easy mana fixing. Because your green is actually going to be able to have blue and things like that, and they've got creatures with reach. I just don't think this guy is aggressive enough for most Rakdos builds. Sinister Possession is kind of a removal card. Anytime enchanted creature attacks or blocks, its controller loses 2 life. I guess maybe if it had flash, it'd be a little bit trickier. Not really. It's just that it basically gives your opponent's creature a cumulative upkeep of 2, that they get to decide not to pay, and they can still keep the dude out. I mean, it can rack up a little bit. It makes a dude with vigilance less saucy. It's an okay card. I just don't see it being played a lot or being very useful. I could be way off on this one. It's just not as great as some of the removal we've had in the past sets. Ubulsar Gatekeepers. This is another new suite of cards. If we have 2 or more gates, a creature gets -2/-2. Now there's one of these in every color as well. This particular one is a pretty good removal spell. It's a creature our opponents control. Which is nice if they don't have any creatures. He just kind of flops onto the field as a 2/4. He is a little bit of a built-in removal spell, except that he is 4-drop, but there are a couple of cards out there that are annoying that are 2 in the ass that you can take care of with this guy. So I think he is useful. He does have his uses. Alright, that's it for black. Thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you guys in red.